Hi, and welcome to the Fair Perspectives podcast, the official podcast of the pro-human movement, brought to you by the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. I'm your host, Melissa Chen, and my co-host is Angeleduardo. Today, we have a very special episode for you. On January 18th, Fair's Legal Network sent to Emory University Student Bar Association on behalf of a group of students who sought to establish a club called the Emory Free Speech Forum, but were denied the ability to do so under the pretext that open inquiry is harmful and because of the white skin color of the founders. FAIR also produced a short film featuring the students to help raise attention for their cause. We are excited to announce that thanks in part to FAIR's efforts, the Free Speech Forum was finally granted chartered status by the university. For their inaugural event, the Free Speech Forum hosted Nadine Strassen, former president of the ACLU, for a discussion called Agreeing to Disagree: The Value of Free Expression in a Legal Education. Today, we speak with the brave founders of the Free Speech Forum about their victory. But first, please enjoy FAIR's film telling of their story. For those of you on the audio feed, you can find the video linked in the episode description. And for those who have already seen the film, you can skip to the time code in the episode description if you wish to go straight to the interview. And for now, we bring you the Emory Free Speech Forum.
I've had the privilege of studying at some of the world's best universities, and at each of them, there was an emphasis on open discourse, open debate.
When you hold your ideas up to scrutiny, that's when they become stronger. That's when we realize, hey, this makes sense, we should pursue this, or maybe this is not as strong of an idea as we thought.
You don't truly realize how important free speech and the free exchange of ideas is until you get into a scenario where you're being challenged, where you're hearing the different viewpoints, and it kind of hits you. Oh, there is a way for me to broaden my viewpoints without giving up who I am.
Unless unpopular ideas can be expressed alongside popular ones, unless minority views can be expressed alongside majority ones, then we're not going to be very sharp in the way that we think, and we're not going to be ultimately very well informed about what's really going on.
One thing that I noticed pretty much right off the bat in coming to Emory, which was a bit of a disappointment, was that there is this culture here of chilled speech, where classmates do not feel comfortable disagreeing with the professor in class. They do not feel comfortable disagreeing with sort of the most radical views that their classmates offer in class. It was in our torts class, taught by Professor Volek. And torts is an area of law that sort of covers things like personal injury, that type of stuff. And we were discussing one subset of that body of law called IIED, which is the intentional infliction of emotional distress.
The court looks at it and they say, okay, you would hear about this event, you would hear about this wrong that was done, and you would exclaim outrage. That was just the standard. Basically, just anything that is very outrageous, that a court would look at objectively and think is outrageous.
And a case called Snyder v. Phelps came up. And Snyder v. Phelps is a case involving the Westboro Baptist Church.
They were protesting over America's tolerance of homosexuality. And so they would go to dead soldiers' funerals, dead Marines' funerals, and they would heckle the families.
And the professor introduced the Westboro Baptist Church by saying, these are the people who carry the signs that say, God hates fags.
Professor quoted that, not calling anyone the word, saying these words are disgusting, so disgusting that they could constitute the intentional infliction of emotional distress.
The point that our professor was making is, had the Westboro Baptist Church held up signs that merely said, our religion disagrees with homosexuality, the families wouldn't have had grounds to sue in the first place, because the degrees of distinction do matter.
Knowing what's happening on campuses these days, and I look around and no one registers anything, no one says anything, no one looks weird.
No one brought it up with him, and so a while, days went by and nothing happened, and then one day,
Student Bar Association and a bunch of the groups at Emory signed on to a letter calling for the reformation of our speech codes. They wanted to create a policy in which professors who choose to quote vile language could be fired or punished.
There were students who spoke up saying they hadn't been able to learn anything for 2 weeks since he had said it. There were students demanding that he apologize. There were straight students who were claiming harm on behalf of their colleagues.
A number of classmates basically started a cancel mob against this professor.
And I think you can make arguments either way about the best way to present that material. The last thing we want is professors walking on eggshells every time they're going to bring up something controversial. We said, hey, why don't we start a nonpartisan club where we can, kind of casually get together and talk about important controversial things, destigmatize the idea that controversial topics should not be talked about casually.
So in this scenario, of course, it's not the Student Government Association, it's the Student Bar Association. We go to them and we present our funding ideas, the types of events we want to have. We present our different speaker ideas that we have.
Perhaps a little bit naively, I thought to myself, well, we have this open expression policy. Surely they're not going to go against university policy just because we want to have an organization that is going to be about bringing different speakers to campus. This is, after all, still a university, right? Foolish of me to be so optimistic, I think. Right from the get-go, in that first hearing that we went to, there was antagonism, hostility, attacks.
I didn't think that this was going to be something that we would be attacked on. I didn't think that this would be controversial.
We were questioned about our race. There was one member of the SBA who pointed to one of the speakers that we were going to get, Andrew Sullivan, openly gay man, living with AIDS. He was on the list of speakers that we were going to invite. And this member of the SBA asked us, if you invited him and he started to say something about critical race theory, how would you shut him down?
I tried to explain to them in the meeting, typically when you invite a speaker to speak about X, they don't then show up and choose to speak about Y. Just not normal for most speakers, I don't think.
Following that hearing, we were denied a charter. We were sent a rejection letter that outlined the different reasons we were denied.
VA essentially told us that we needed to have a mediator. I think that's condescending to say that our ideas can't speak for themselves.
They said that if you come back and if you address our concerns as to why we denied you, then you'll get another shot. So we said, okay, went back and did another presentation, addressed the things that they talked about in their letter. They had talked about how there was some overlap with us and other organizations. And so we addressed why there was no overlap, addressed the moderator issue, and it was not enough because we were denied again. And we didn't get a rejection letter the second time. There was no explanation.
Cancel culture only wins when bystanders stay silent. It's one of the reasons why I personally chose to speak up last semester. If you value free speech, if you value an open society, if you value being able to have discourse, being able to build those bridges and gain understanding, if you value those things, it's important to stand up for the mechanisms like free speech that make it all possible.
You can't be canceled if you decide not to be. I'm going to be a law student no matter what. They're not going to kick me out for having a different opinion. It's not going to happen. We're going to be here no matter what for 3 years. And next year, there are going to be other kids who are going to come who are going to also be questioning the orthodoxy. And if you stay there and you just firmly, politely stand your ground, people are ultimately going to have to deal with what you have to say. And that's the only way that I can see that things will change.
We want to attack ideas, not people. And remember, have these hard conversations and attack the idea with everything you have, but know there's a person on the other side and that you can still be friends with that person no matter how much you disagree. And if we can spread that message, I think that will be good for open discourse and good for academia, good for our university, and good for the country, is that people are not ideas. We attack ideas, we don't attack people.
But you have to do something, whatever that may be, talking to someone, utilizing some resource, bringing attention to it even, talking about it with other students or with other people is going to make more of an impact than you'll know. And you're not going to realize until it's happened, but once it's happened, I think that you're going to feel like you did something that was actually worthwhile.
All right, we are joined today by the founders of the Emory Free Speech Forum. Welcome everybody. We've got a full house today. We've got Michael, McKinnon, Corey, and Cameron. Welcome to Fair Perspectives, everybody.
Hey, thank you for having us. We're excited to be here.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, actually, how did you all meet each other? Did you all know each other before, or were you brought together by this thing?
We're all at Emory, as I guess at most law schools, we have houses. It's like a Hogwarts situation. We're all in the same house. So we're in all the same classes. We see each other all the time, every day. And we were all in the same torts class where this incident occurred with the professor. And so that's kind of how we met. And there was this session where the professor sort of invited comments, and Michael and Cameron and I kind of all spoke up. And it really wasn't until that moment, I think, that we kind of like found each other as kind of ideological, not even ideological, because we all have actually very different beliefs, but free speech allies, I guess, is what it is.
Though I will add one caveat to that. Michael and I are roommates.
There is that. Yes.
So we did know each other a little bit before then.
Gotcha.
But I wasn't sure at the time how big of a free speech advocate Michael would be. I've been very happily surprised.
Yeah. So how did you guys kind of know about each other, right? Because if there is this sort of chilling effect, right, you'd almost be afraid to broach the topic with someone if you're not sure how they're going to respond. So how did that go?
I know for myself, I was, I came into law school with sort of a mentality of, don't make waves, just keep your head down, do the work, and get on with it. And then this incident happened with the professor, and you saw so many different student organizations going after him, and they were essentially using their identity as a weapon. And I thought to myself, well, cancel culture only wins when bystanders stay silent. And if they can use their identity as a weapon, I can use it as a shield. So I spoke up in the listening session and defended him and said, I wasn't offended. I didn't think there was a problem with him quoting a Supreme Court case in a class. And it sort of went from there. And for me personally, it was, I reached a point where even if it didn't win me new friends, I thought to myself, what would I regret more? Not standing up in defense of someone who was being unfairly attacked in sort of a cultural problem that I think is a big issue, cancel culture, or would I feel better about myself in the future looking back if I just remained silent and let it go on? And I decided for myself that I'd rather lose friends and know that I'd said something.
Yeah, I mean, the incident that occurred was about a supposed slur toward gay men, and the people who were complaining about this were largely not gay men, and I, unlike them, am a gay man. So I just felt like the fact that this was happening in my class, I'm a bit older than most of my classmates. I may not look it, but I am. And it is hard to, that was a joke, sorry. But it is hard to kind of live in the world and see what's happening from afar. I kind of had a sense of what's happening on college campuses these days, but the fact that something happened in the first month in my class about a gay thing, I almost felt like I was being called to take some action and to try to help in some way. So that's why I spoke up.
McKinnon, what about you? How did you feel about this, and how did you get involved with the guys here?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was originally sort of just kind of like Cameron, I guess, keeping my head down. But I think when I was in that class, I sort of agreed. I could see all sides of it, but I mostly agreed, especially when Michael spoke up. I agreed with what Michael was saying. And I saw it as, maybe I should say something. And the whole class was just like, maybe I should say something. Maybe I should say something. I probably shouldn't. And then, and then Cameron spoke up and Corey spoke up, and it was like, everything they were saying I agreed with, and other people spoke up too who I agreed with. And I was like, okay, at this point, I wouldn't be adding anything because everything that I would say has already been said. I would just more be singling myself out as someone who agrees with them, and therefore, everyone else probably disagrees with. And so I kind of just, I guess, decided that, maybe I shouldn't. And already there were so many people trying to speak. And so I just figured it would just not be productive. But I do remember that after the class was over, I approached Corey and I messaged Michael and I was like, hey, you guys, thank you so much for what you said. It like really resonated and I totally agreed. And I am really impressed that you were able to speak up in front of all those people and say that, because I absolutely agree. And I think it's something that's important to stand up for. And after that was when, I don't know if it was a few days later, maybe Michael reached back out to me and was like, hey, I know you messaged me. We're interested in starting a group.
Yeah, it was interesting because I spoke, and Cameron and I had discussed it before. At this point, I didn't really know Corey or McKinnon. But at this point, the groupthink was so crazy that it just seemed like I think we all felt similarly on an island. Everyone thinks this professor is wrong, should be fired. The groupthink was like nothing I've seen before.
And after the sort of listening talking session we had with the professor, then these student organizations that were against him proceeded to try and organize a protest, walking out of his classroom. So Michael, Corey, and myself organized a walk-in alternate protest, which didn't at the time win us that many new allies.
What were the numbers like relatively, like on both sides of the protest and the counter protests?
For the counter protests, we probably had 40 or 50 there.
Yeah.
I don't personally know for the actual protests because
it was definitely bigger.
They were at the same time.
Yeah.
It would have been bigger. They were outside marching, chanting. What was it? I mean, free expression is oppression is what they were chanting.
I mean, that was the popular thing to do.
Yeah.
There was well over 100 people.
Yeah. My boyfriend, who is not in law school, isn't involved in any of this stuff, but he was like, he heard about the walkout and he texted me while it was happening. He was like, don't walk out. And I had to explain to him, like, no, walking, like, because he doesn't want me to get involved or get in trouble. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, walking out is the thing the popular people are doing. Like, that's the orthodox thing. If I wanted to not get involved, I would be walking out. Walking in is actually like the harder thing to do. But it's just kind of hard to it's kind of hard to explain that because these things are so weird.
But I think the walk-in was quite successful. If in no other sense, it was successful in that it fractured this image which the original protesters were trying to create of this is a monolith. Everyone agrees with us. There's no room for dissent.
Right.
And at the end of the day, that's what the walk-in was about. Yeah. It was about saying you have every right to protest if that's what you feel you need to do. But there are other options. So you don't have to. And so it created that space for dissenting voices. And I think we had a very good turnout.
Yeah, I think that's a profile in courage, and it allowed each of you to actually recognize just how many, who else was also in agreement with you and come together. And that's why you're starting this free speech club or free speech forum. Which to me it's mind-boggling because you're all law students, right? And the very fact that so not only is this forum where you're going to invite speakers to debate ideas, but it seems that the values and the culture of free speech in and of itself is not valued at a place like Emory Law. This is scary to me. And, I think there's a reason the founders enshrined it in the Constitution as the First Amendment. And very powerful, right? And it's something that really sets the United States apart. There's really no other country like it in that regard. But here you are at a law school and people are marching and calling free speech oppression. I think can you just kind of dwell on why this phrase and these slogans and this idea that it is oppressive, actually dangerous, not just for your profession, but, for the country in general?
So I think that these attitudes come in large part from ignorance from those who are espousing them. They haven't studied their history enough. They don't understand. They haven't thought about it thoroughly enough to understand what actually the function of free speech is in our society. And for ours, it's the way that our society releases tensions and gets through difficulties and challenges that we have with one another. And when you take that away and you limit that, at a certain point, you get to a point where the only thing that's left is violence within a society. And you see that in other societies around the world and throughout history where they had no mechanism by which they could communicate ideas in which they could hash things out in nonviolent ways. And they had lots of violence. So I think it's dangerous beyond any profession. I think it's one of the bedrock institutions of our civilization, and it's a good hill to die on, though it's an even better hill to win on.
So tell us about the Free Speech Forum, now that it's an officially sanctioned group. How is it going to be structured? How does it work? How do you invite people? How do you decide on topics? What's going on there?
So I guess the idea is, and this was what we thought about months ago, is to have two types of events. One type of event where we bring in speakers like we're doing with Professor Nadine Strassen on Tuesday, for just people who are interesting and maybe a little bit off the beaten path, specifically speakers who are interested in free speech. And then the second thing, which is pretty casual, but I think super important, is just hold conversations in a casual setting about important topics. So things like, go to a bar and let's talk about, let's talk about voting rights. Let's talk about hate speech laws, things that are conversations that we don't really see happening in our law school. But let's show that we can have these important conversations and still get along afterwards and show the value in that.
How, to give a little bit of context for people who have the concerns that they had about what you guys are doing, I wouldn't expect you to shut down a conversation about CRT if a speaker decides to speak about that. But do you have any kind of protocol in place or ideas for how you would moderate a discussion that maybe starts to get heated, or the topics that you're discussing are, sensitive for some people, even if they, volunteer to come to this thing and try it out? There are still things that might get people on edge. There are still things that might be upsetting. Do you have anything in place? Have you been thinking about how to regulate that sort of stuff?
So I think the core to this idea, so one thing we actually expressly rejected was the SBA, Student Bar Association, said, we want you to have moderators. And we kind of said no to that. We are, law students. I'm 24 years old. We think we're capable of having conversations about these important topics on our own. We don't need supervision. And I think the core to these conversations is attacking ideas and respecting people. So we want to be able to separate the person from the idea. The four of us, for example, have totally different political leanings, political views, but we can separate the way we think from who we are as people, and stressing that value as much as possible and creating an atmosphere where we see these ideas are important, but, we need to talk about this, and we want to create an atmosphere where these ideas are flowing.
For big events, the university does have like free speech observers who are kind of there, just kind of be neutral and observe and make sure things aren't getting out of hand. And but I also think, there's nothing about this club that I would expect necessarily anything to go wrong any more than it would at any other club. And, every club hosts people who say things on this or that, and things go off without a hitch. If someone is going to be crazy or violent, there's no more likelihood that they're going to come to our event than they are to the Real Estate Society event, right? So I just think maybe that's naive. I don't know, but we will. I think it's worth not. Certainly not. We're certainly not going to have school sanctioned moderators to tell us what we can and can't say. I mean, that's not the solution.
I think the only extent to which we need to have a moderator is just for the logistical purposes of, then I think it sort of works like any other event. You have someone who's in control of the microphone who makes sure that the person who is supposed to be speaking has it. And, when you have questions, give it to the next person, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that, there were there was a push from the SBA in our first projection where, in addition to moderators, they said we needed to have mediators. And that, I think, is just
UN peacekeepers.
Yeah.
So it's like,
it's unnecessary. It's infantilizing. It's very condescending towards students. even the students who are opposed to free speech more generally, I do actually have enough faith in them as at least semi-functional adults to have a conversation and not just completely fall to pieces or start throwing things. We are all people, and we're not wild animals.
Yeah, and I think so. Just a little more to your question too is that was a great point by Cameron. We all are, hopefully we all are, keeping our composure, but as leaders of anything, and we've all four of us been leaders of something at some point, you have to have compassion and sympathy in pretty much anything you do. And so we're not just going to start a club and then have things get heated and get out of hand and people start arguing and screaming at each other, or someone starts obviously getting emotional, and we're just going to laugh in their face. We're going to have compassion. We're going to comfort people if they need it. If someone comes out about a personal experience, this has happened at some of our sort of more casual, informal, unofficial meetings. People get a little emotional or start talking about a personal experience, and you have to have compassion, and you can thank people for sharing their experience. And if someone gets upset or emotional, you can pull them aside and talk to them about it, or you can apologize for upsetting them. There are things that are just basic human decency things that everybody does. And to what Cameron and Corey were saying, we're not any less likely to do those normal human things than any other club is going to do. And so for those people who were worried about that, for the people who thought we were just going to create some event where anybody who came in and got upset would be, terrorized, that is not the case. We are still going to show everyone basic human decency.
I do think that what's happening, though, is just something that has happened, at least from my experience, and why your club was seen as more dangerous than, say, the other. You mentioned that other political clubs have also invited controversial speakers, but they didn't receive the same resistance that you guys have faced. And I remember this was 4 or 5 years ago now, when we had started to do an event. It was at Harvard University. And it was an event that had free speech in the title. And the student union actually came back to us and said, oh, you can't use the word free speech. And we had, the editor, Fleming Rose, who published the Muhammad cartoons, the Prophet Muhammad cartoons in the Danish newspaper. And he was there along with a free speech scholar and a journalist, Mustafa Akil. And Harvard came back to us and said, you can't publish this event. The title free speech cannot be in the headline because it is a dog whistle to the alt-right. That was the reason that was given to us. And so we had to, kind of walk on eggshells and kind of reframe the whole event as defending minorities within minority. It was a really stupid, pretzel logic just to get free speech out of the title, because we were told that the word itself is a dog whistle. And I think that might be why your club is facing more resistance, because it's offering controversial speakers on a neutral platform versus you have, say, the YAF or a Republican club or something. It's explicit what their ideology is. And I think there's this sense coming from the left that simply framing this as free speech and open debate is in fact platforming and privileging these viewpoints that, frankly, they just, would rather not get platformed at all. So, how would you respond to that if, this kind of argument?
Well, I think my initial response is that the interesting thing about dog whistles is if you can hear it, that seems to say more about you. So that would be an initial thought. But I think, to the extent that we take those kinds of allegations seriously, which I think, for me personally, with a grain of salt, you have to draw a line in the sand and say that you're not willing to give up certain pieces of language and whatnot just because some fringe group now says that it represents them. Okay. If they really want it to be some sort of dog whistle for them, sure, that's not what we're using it for. And it's not really our responsibility to police every last listener's interpretation of something. And it's, if you start going down that path, you're going to lose all of the linguistic tools you have and ways of describing things, because over time, fringe groups will just eat them up and say, well, that represents us and this represents us. And then you'll have nothing left to be able to say anything.
Yeah, and I agree. I think in the idea of the word free speech, I think that's one thing we kind of contemplated a lot. And I'm really glad we ended up leaning into that term, because it is, it has its controversial connotations these days. And I think that's probably part of the reason we got rejected, is this idea that free speech is just an avenue for hate. But I think that's short-sighted. You look at, yes, people say hateful things, but in the long run, free speech is it builds bridges. It makes people understand each other. It helps people get to know each other. If you, no matter how much you disagree with someone, I guarantee you, if you sit in a room with them and hash it out for 20 minutes, you're going to see the human on the other side. And I just think that's really important, and something that's getting lost when we shut each other down and don't have these conversations.
At the end of the day, it seems like the main reason you'd want to stop it is if you want to prevent people from being able to see the humanity in those with whom they disagree.
I wanted to ask you guys if you had actually read Barry Weiss published on her Substack a piece by Aaron Sabarium, I think I butchered his name. It's titled The Takeover of America's Legal System. Did you guys read that piece?
I might have. I know I subscribe to her Substack, but I don't recognize the name.
Okay. It basically talked about, a lawyer. It opened with a story of a lawyer who had defended Al Gore and Al Gore versus Bush and paved the way for gay marriage in the Supreme Court. And he was accosted at a talk, hosted, he was a liberal legal legend, but he happened to also represent Harvey Weinstein. And he was subject to cancellation because he, dared to represent somebody as heinous as Weinstein. And it just ran through all the ways in which very basic foundational principles of our legal system is slowly being eroded. Right now, the culture of free speech, for example, our adversarial legal system, which posits that everybody, regardless, deserves the best representation, due process. There are just some principles, especially the whole justice is blind. Now we got to orient towards some sort of race and gender kind of future. It seems like it's being co-opted in a way. And I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on that. Maybe this is something itself that, the Free Speech Club that you started would want to look into and debate.
I agree. I think it is being co-opted, and many of those sort of bedrock principles are being eroded, or to use the parlance of the academy right now, they're being problematized. I notice it in broad strokes, and I've also noticed it even in sort of small things just in our classes. We'll have a professor who asks for input from the class on what the opposition's point of view is. And then you provide what the opposite, even if you don't agree with it. McKinnon's in one of my classes. We were in a health law class, and the professor asked for different sort of stereotypes that the pro-life movement has of the pro-choice movement. And I didn't share what my position is one way or the other, but I said what some of those stereotypes are. And I was getting, if looks could kill.
Not just looks. It wasn't just looks.
Like people were getting angry at me just for answering the question. Or, in a criminal law class, you're part of this class discussion and argument, and you take the side of someone who's done a horrific crime, and you try and give them the best defense you can on the spot, and you're getting people looking at you like, how dare you? You now you're making excuses. You're blaming the victim. Well, no, I'm doing what we're here in this class to do, which is to sharpen the skill of being able to represent clients you maybe don't like. And so I do notice that, many people take the view that they should be able to represent only the people that they think are on the side of justice.
Right.
And I think it's in part because they've lost that component of the education, which helps them to understand that justice merely is not only about the outcome, it's also about the process.
Yes.
And that there's a large extent to which in just sort of the complex society in which we live and just our limitations as human beings, mere mortals, that our ability to get the process right is much more attainable than our ability to always get the right outcome. And so justice, to a certain extent, falls more within the process side. So if we get the process right enough times over and over again, that's what gets us closer to the right outcome overall. And so many of our classmates, I think, seem to have this view that, well, we should always just know what the right outcome is, and that's what we should get to. And unfortunately, all too frequently, the fastest route to that right outcome is by taking the wrong process.
Yeah, I mean, your job as a lawyer is to stand on one side of the case, right? That is the necessary condition. It actually doesn't matter that much which side of the case you stand on. The point is that there are two parts to this case. You're not the client and you're not the judge. Your job is to create the necessary condition by representing one of the sides. And you often don't get to pick which side you're on, as these people will eventually find out. And you often don't like the people that you're working for, but you are kind of the cog in the machine that gets us closer to what is hopefully a just outcome. And until you're the judge, until you're the policymaker, then you get to think about all these high-minded things about truth and justice. But when you're the lawyer representing the client, your job is to advocate for their interests, and
A professional obligation.
It's your highest obligation. Yeah.
Well said.
Now, is there an opportunity for people outside of the school to be privy to maybe the speaker events that you guys put on, or is it exclusive to just Emory students?
It is not exclusive. So our first speaker, Nadine Strawson, we have done our best to advertise it to other area law schools, to members of the judiciary. The only sort of limitation is our ability to get the word out. But
it's a lot higher now that we are an official organization. Woohoo!
Right.
So yeah, we're happy to have anyone who wants to come and participate and listen.
Great.
That's what we're all about.
And so before we wrap up, let us know how people can find you, how people could find out about what events are coming up. Do you have anything set up for that yet?
Yes, our Instagram is Emory is just at the at symbol, which the younger people than me understand. Emory Free Speech Forum.
EMORY Free Speech Forum, and that's just on Instagram.
That is on Instagram now. Yeah, maybe we'll set up a Twitter too.
We should do that.
Yeah.
We hadn't gotten that far.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed to use the word Emory until yesterday.
Yes.
Right.
I think we're up to 24 Instagram followers, but yeah, so it made things difficult for us advertising, marketing wise, that we couldn't use the name of our school for a while, but we can now.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. Get that Twitter account fired up and we'll make sure to tag both. Thank you for listening to Fair Perspectives. If you'd like to support the show, you can do it by subscribing on YouTube and on your favorite podcast platform and leaving us a positive rating and review. You can also access exclusive podcast content such as Q&As and bonus episodes by visiting us and signing up at fairperspectives.org. For weekly fair news and opinion pieces by members of the fair community, visit our Substack at fairforall.substack.com and tune into Fair News Weekly wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to join or support the pro-human movement, visit us at fairforall.org/join us. Thanks again, and see you next time.